Good morning. This meeting of the House Education Committee will come to order. Today is Friday, March 6th, and the time is 8:03. Members of House Education present are Co-Chair Representative Harriet Drummond, Representative Delana Johnson, Representative Grier Hopkins is excused today. We've got Representative Tiffany Zolkowski and Representative Chris Tuck, and Representative Prox, and myself, Rep. Andy Story. We have a quorum to conduct business. Before we begin, I'd like to remind everyone to silence their cell phones. Today, our recording secretary is Shannon McCain, and Doug Bridges is our LIO moderator, assisting with tech and teleconferencing support. Thank you both. Today on the agenda, we will return to House Bill 236, amending the base student allocation. Then we're going to move on to House Bill 180, University of Alaska Faculty Regent. First, I'd like to take up House Bill 236. The House Education Committee considered the bill at two previous meetings, February 26th and March 4th. We heard invited testimony from the Association of Alaska School Boards, Alaska Council of School Administrators, and NEA, National Education Association of Alaska. We heard from many individuals across the state during 2 days of public testimony. A total of 43 individuals testified online or in person from 13 communities. There were another 14 individuals who were unable to testify during the meeting because of time constraints. In addition, the committee received over 800 emails, letters, and resolutions. 80. What did I say? 800? Sorry. 80 emails, letters, and resolutions, along with a resolution from 260 Anchorage residents protesting the cuts proposed by the Anchorage School District to deal with their budget shortfall. Of those who testified telephonically or in person, 41 supported House Bill 236, 2 were opposed. Of those who submitted written testimony to the House Education Committee, all supported House Bill 236. The committee set an amendment deadline of Thursday, March 5th at 2 p.m. No amendments were received, so now we have the bill before the committee. Do any members have closing comments or questions about the bill? Representative Prox.
Yes, I was looking at different options or funding costs and overall, and the state schools are not, certainly not directly comparable to other school options, but the cost for homeschooling, the correspondence program and whatnot is considerably less. The other options for private schools and whatnot are considerably less, and then I started looking, does the state have a strategic plan and things like that that are available to us that show a direction of where they're trying to contain costs, they're trying to direct money towards a specific goal, written down goal, things like that?
Thank you, Representative Prox. What we have as a state plan is what's from the Department of Education and Early Development, and they have the Alaska Education Challenge.
Alaska Education Challenge.
Yes.
Okay.
If you go on their website, you will find that we have a few presentations in prior meetings from them that we will make sure and get to you.
Also, Madam Chair.
Yes, Representative Drummond.
Thank you. In response to Representative Prox's statement, the public school system funds thousands of homeschoolers through various programs, through charter schools. I think the IDEA program out of Galena has 1,200 students statewide, many of whom are in Anchorage and other urban communities. And those homeschoolers get almost the same BSA amount
I think it is.
as schools, kids that go to physical schools. So that's and those are publicly funded.
Yes, and there's a number of those, and that's a good, I think there's 3 different, which is interesting. There's Galena, I know of, Nenana runs one, and now the Fairbanks North Star Borough School District is getting in the game, if you will, and it's a good
Anchorage
business
has
model.
at least
Anchorage
one,
must
if
have
not
at least
two,
one, yeah.
homeschool charter
Yeah.
schools.
Okay.
Any other comments? Co-Chair Drummond, do you want to, any wrap-up comments or as
Yeah.
co-sponsor of the
Yes,
bill?
thank you, Madam Chair. As a former school board member, I always get comments on schools and school funding and school policy everywhere that I go. And I think, and I recall in my time on the Anchorage School Board making cuts of $25 million on a regular basis, and that was many years ago, to stay within the available funding. So schools have been cutting for years. We are now far beyond. We're getting into the marrow, as someone said, not just the bone of what's being cut. I know there were a couple of hundred people present at the Anchorage School Board meeting a couple of weeks ago when they finalized their budget, and Anchorage parents are not happy with the Anchorage School District's level of cuts. We need to make sure that that families stay in Alaska, that kids are educated in Alaska, and that they have a reason to stay here. We need to make sure that businesses have a reason to come here, that their employees' families will be properly educated and supported. As the future of our state, there is no other way to do this than to continue to support schools appropriately. And this BSA increase is way past due, and I think it's our responsibility to make sure that we move this out and put it before the entire body for support. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for those comments, Representative Drummond. I would like to really add that I believe House Bill 236 is a positive step in the right direction for good education funding policy. I believe for children, families, and the thousands of hard-working school staff across Alaska, it's important to end the uncertainty of the funding roller coaster. It is within our power to ensure predictability, to optimize planning and personnel within each district and within each school. This is a 2-year funding bill. Overall, the two BSA changes in House Bill 236 reflect flat funding for next year and inflation-adjusted funding the following year. This is a modest ask that will help meet increased expenses and allow districts to plan. Without this BSA increase or equivalent funding outside the formula next year, Alaska students will deal with $30 million less going towards their education. It is a myth that Alaska's spending on its kids is way out of proportion with the rest of the United States. In fact, when adjustments are made for the cost of living in Alaska and its unique challenges, Alaska is well within the mid-range of state spending on a per-student basis. I absolutely believe there is no better investment in the strength of our state than investing in the education of our children. Let's move this bill forward and continue to advocate for the children of this state. With that, I would entertain a motion to move this bill from committee.
Madam Chair,
Representative Drummond.
I move House Bill 236, Work Order 31-LS0697/S, from committee with individual recommendation and attached fiscal notes.
Is there any objection? Seeing none, House Bill 236 passes from committee. We will now, taking it ease, will members sign the committee report? We are back in order, and next we will have up House Bill 180 relating to the Board of Regents of the University of Alaska. This is the first hearing of this bill. Here to present the bill is Representative Wool and his staff, Ashley Carrick. Please come forward and introduce yourself for the record and proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Co-Chair and members of the Education Committee. My name is Adam Wall. I represent District 5 in Fairbanks. With me is my staff member, Ashley Carrick. I have a short prepared statement, and then Ashley will do a PowerPoint presentation on the bill. So I'm happy to bring HB 180 in front of this committee today. This is my first bill in front of the Education Committee. So thank you all for hearing this bill. This bill would establish a faculty regent on the University of Alaska Board of Regents. Currently, there are 5 states whose public university systems include a faculty member on their board. These states believe that the interests of the institutions are best served when a faculty regent is granted voting representation. Much like a hospital board that often contains physician members, my hometown of Fairbanks included, they have physicians on their hospital board, or like a bank board that has bankers on their board. There's a value to having a direct stakeholder representative as part of the decision-making process. The university also has student regents on their board, and they thought this was a good idea, so I think faculty sort of goes hand in glove with a student regent. This bill represents more than a seat at the table. It represents the ability of the faculty, like the student regents, to have a voice and a vote. This bill would ensure that inclusive dialogue occurs on the board, and that there is meaningful input on the direction of the university system is preserved in the years to come. This time I'd like Ashley Carrick to go through the presentation of our bill.
Thank you. For the record, Ashley Carrick, staff to Representative Wool, and I wanted to walk through some of the differences in state systems related to having a faculty regent on the board, and then walk through some of the specifics of this bill. So to start out, just a brief review of our current University of Alaska Board of Regents system. We currently have 10 regents who serve 8-year terms. These are at-large members that are appointed by the governor. And we have 1 student regent, and the student regent serves a 2-year term, so it's a shortened term. However, they do have full board powers. They can vote, they can travel with the board, they can enter executive session, and are treated exactly like any of the 10 at-large members. They must have a cumulative 2.5 GPA, and they are elected by their campuses, and then a nominee is selected by the governor. So there are 3 nominees for student regent that get forwarded to the governor, and then the governor chooses a student from one of the 3 main campuses, or outlying campuses it could be. And the current role of faculty with the Board of Regents is that they have a seat at the table. It's a separate table from the board's table. They have full speaking rights. The current dynamic for the Board of Regents with faculty is they're able to get called on and speak up at any time. And the chair of the Faculty Alliance makes a report at each Board of Regents meeting. So there is a moment for them to provide a report, and then they have speaking rights. Oops. So among state university systems, and again, we're not including private university systems in this map. However, there are private universities that also have a faculty member as a part of their board of trustees. Across the 50 states, there are 16 state universities which have a student regent, and 6 state universities that have a faculty regent. And the reason why you see 5 highlighted states there is because Oregon has 2 state university systems, and both of them have a faculty regent. So there are 5 states with faculty regents, 6 university systems at the public level. And as you can see by the hash on 4 of those states, there are 4 states which have both a faculty and a student regent. And I wanted to make a note here that these are student and faculty regents with full voting powers. University systems, as we'll see in the next couple of slides, have a lot of different ways of organizing themselves. And there are a lot of different ways in which faculty and students provide reports to boards of trustees across the 50 states. So there are a lot of ex officio or other types of membership for faculty and students. However, we looked specifically at states where the student or faculty regent has full voting powers, travels with the board, and is essentially treated as an at-large member would be. Also, I just wanted to make a note that 15% of private institutions across the country have a faculty regent. So since there are just 5 public university state systems which have a faculty regent, I just wanted to briefly touch upon each one of them just to show some of the differences in how boards of regents are structured across the states. And really just to point out that there is no standard system for a board of regents across the country. In Oregon State University and University of Oregon, their trustees board has 15 members. They have 11 at-large members with 1 faculty member, 1 student member, and 1 staff member. In contrast, Pennsylvania State University has 38 trustee members. That includes 6 at-large members. They also have 9 alumni elected members and 6 agricultural members. And the board also elects 6 of their own members, 1 of whom is a faculty member. On the next slide, I have 3 more examples: Florida, Kentucky, and Tennessee. The state university system in Florida has 17 members total. They have 14 at-large members. The chair of the advisory council of the faculty senate is automatically a member, full voting member of the board. So that is their faculty regent or trustee in Florida. And they also have the commissioner of education as a full voting member of their board, and the chair of the Florida Student Association rather than a governor-appointed student regent. In Kentucky, there's 11 voting members, 8 at-large members, 1 faculty and 1 staff regent, elected by the governing councils, not the governor, not appointed by the governor, and a student regent. And then finally in Tennessee, there are 18 members on their board of trustees. That includes 12 at-large members, 1 faculty member, 1 student, and 4 ex officio members who do not have the same full voting powers. So as you can see, there's a tremendous variation in how faculty regents operate and how they're elected. There's also a tremendous difference between states, and this includes states which do not have a faculty or a student regent. In doing this research, my conclusion is there are many, many different ways of operating a university system. And there's really not a standard way in which to base our model off of. So that being said, moving on to the next slide, HB 180 increases the number of regents for the University of Alaska from 11 to 12 regents. Nominees from the faculty senate of each of the 3 main campuses would be put forward. They would each put forward 2 nominees. So this would lead to 6 candidates for the government to select an appointee from. The faculty must be a tenured faculty. And I wanted to make another note here that our original bill and the bill as it currently stands has the faculty regent as serving a 4-year term. And based on some feedback from faculty members across the state, we'd like to ask at some point for the committee to consider moving this to a 2-year term. Additionally, the faculty regent would have full powers of the regent, as we've talked about. They'd be able to vote, they would be able to travel with the board, and they could enter executive session. And in our bill, there's also language stating that a tiebreaker vote, only of the full board, only if there's a 6-6 tie, would be broken by a vote of the president of the university system. And in the case of a vote that's not of the whole board, majority rules would still be the way that that vote would be decided, which is how the board currently structures its votes. Finally, I just wanted to mention a few of the benefits of having a faculty regent. As Representative Wool stated, this is more than a seat at the table. Currently, faculty have a voice, but they don't have a vote, and it is our belief that there's a distinct difference between the two. Faculty would be able to be full voting members, could do all of the things other regents could do, much like the student regent is currently able to do. And that allows the faculty to provide a stakeholder interest in the board beyond their current ability. One of the things I'd like to note is that we hold the student regent right now to a high standard of professionalism, as do any boards that include stakeholders on their board, such as physicians on hospital boards or bankers on bank boards. They're held to a high standard of professionalism, which means that they should and would be recusing themselves from a conflicted vote. This has occurred in the past. Student regents have recused themselves from votes about tuition increases that might affect their own programs. And we would expect that same level of professionalism from a faculty regent. And ultimately, this ensures that faculty, like the students currently, are given a voting interest in the board. And at this time, I'd be happy to take any questions that you have.
Any questions from Representative Drummond?
Thank you. Thank you, Representative Wool and Ms. Carrick, for this really interesting proposal. I have a couple of questions back to the first slide after the title slide. I'm not clear on how the students are elected. It says 2 students are elected by their campus. I think you said 3 in your presentation, but there are 3 main campuses. So does each main campus choose 2 students, and then there are 6? I need a little more understanding about how that happens.
Sure. To the chair, there can be up to 2 students elected from each campus, and the election process, to the best of my knowledge, works through a petition process. So a student who's interested in becoming the student regent would have to walk around the campus and ask students for a petition signature to be considered. And I can't tell you off the top of my head how many signatures, but it's a pretty high threshold of signatures. And so up to 2 students from each of the campuses could be forwarded to the governor.
Okay, great, by petition. Okay, all right. Follow up? Actually, I have additional questions, Madam Chair.
Go ahead. Yes.
Let's see. I know you did a lot of research on how other state universities do this. I was particularly interested in the 6 agriculture members from Pennsylvania State University. Is that 6 members of the agriculture faculty? They must have a College of Agriculture or something like that. Do you know any details beyond that?
To the chair, to the best of my knowledge in looking at Pennsylvania's system, these are 6 members who are involved in some way in the agriculture industry.
So they could be members of the business community. Okay.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. One more question, Madam Chair.
Sure, follow up?
I imagine you would want an amendment for the 2-year term, changing from the 4-year term to the 2-year term. I have heard that request as well. And also on that page, I'm not so sure about a tiebreaker vote by the president of the university. Is the president an employee of the board? The way superintendents are employees of school boards? Is the president selected and employed by the board?
Through the chair, Representative Drummond, yeah, technically speaking, the president works for the Board of Regents. So, employee of the board, I think they're employees of the university, but I think they work at the pleasure of the Board of Regents. I think that's how they describe it.
Follow up?
Follow-up.
That or permission to dialogue.
Sure.
As the late Representative Max Grunberg would ask frequently. I'm not so sure that the president voting, if the president is the employee of the board, I'm not sure if the president should have the tiebreaker capability. I'd much prefer to see, since it increases the number of regions from 11 to 12, instead of 6 yays to pass something, they would need 7. So you would actually need more of a consensus than an 11-member board in order to pass anything. And I'm not sure, if you have a tie, you don't have passage.
Yeah, through the chair, Representative Drummond. The only issue I see with that is if not all members are there. So if you say you need 7, but if there's 11 people there, it'd be a 6-5 simple majority. And in our situation, if there's 11 members there and it's a 6-5, that would be a decided, passing number, 6. But
They have different rules than we do. For example, on our House floor, amendments can pass by a simple majority of the members present, but the final bill requires the majority of the number of members in the House, or 21, at all times, no matter how few are present. Do you know what the voting rules are currently?
Through the chair, Representative Drummond, I believe they use Robert's rules. But in times past, I know that I don't know, they don't call them bills, but what's that? I don't know when something comes before the board, a majority will, 6-5 or 6-4, depending on how many people are there. So I don't believe it's a majority of the total, but it's a majority of those present.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah, thank you. I have Representative Tuck.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through the chair. So just along the lines of what Co-Chair Drummond was saying, one of my concerns is on this one is that now we have a president that oversees a faculty member. And I just want to share some concerns about that undue influence on that faculty member when it comes to voting something, when the vote is pretty contentious and pretty close. The president will have some power on making sure he gets 2 votes going the direction he may want to go if it's a split board. So I do have a little bit of concern about having that being a 12-member board and an odd member. I know there's one other state that you pointed out that had an even member, but all the other ones had odd numbers. And I don't know how they function in that even number. I guess that's probably my question. Who is the tiebreaker on that even member board? I think was it Tennessee?
Yeah,
Pennsylvania.
and Tennessee. It looks like 2 of them.
Oh, 2 of them, okay. Yeah. So how are the tiebreaker on those determined?
Through the chair to Representative Tuck, I would have to look into that for you. Yeah.
And if I may, Madam Chair,
Follow up.
and through the chair, so I know other states are doing this right now. It looks like we have 6 states or 6 university systems. A lot of universities that don't do this. Who's asking for this, and why is this necessary?
Through the chair, Representative Tuck. This has been a request since I've been in Juneau, actually, 5 years or so. And I entertained the idea, but in the end, I held off. But this last year, with the university's been going through a lot of budget cuts and having a lot of Board of Regents meetings, and there's been some voicing from faculty members saying their voice isn't heard, and we heard a lot of that this past summer. And I thought it'd be a good time to give a faculty member a seat at the table, so that their voice, and they do have a seat at 8. They're in the same room, but this would be a full voting membership, and I thought it would help the faculty feel like they're fully represented, and much the same way that the student is. And I've heard in the past from the administration at the university saying, well, there's a conflict of interest. We can't have a faculty member at the table. There's too much conflict. But I say, well, you have a student there, and the student has to vote on things like tuition, or if a program's getting cut. What if the program that the student is in is on the chopping block? Now, granted, they will be able to teach it out, so even if it was cut, they wouldn't cut it immediately, and that student would have time to finish the program. But I think there's inherent conflicts of interest for a student as well, and if it's a true conflict, they can recuse themselves from the vote, same as a faculty member could. But I feel like the inner workings of a university are primarily students who go there to learn and faculty who teach or do research. And I think that those two components are so vital at a university that to not have the insight and voice of those two entities at the table that makes all the decisions, I think is leaving something out. And like I said, much the way the hospital board has a physician and probably a nurse on there too. I think there's nurse representatives, doctor representatives, because they want to know what's going on sort of in the trenches, you know, and what's really going on at the university and how these, I think they can answer. They're qualified. And I think a lot of people on the Board of Regents are business leaders or community leaders or they're political appointees. So they're not all have a lot of knowledge of the university necessarily. And I think having a faculty member will give that perspective.
And follow up?
Follow up?
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. And actually, that's the best part of your presentation. I thought that was really good. I'll say this, that, and universities are probably exempt from this, but I know that serving on the apprenticeship board for our apprenticeship school and electrical industry, there's ERISA laws that prevent an employee from serving on those boards because of the benefit. Your explanation of a student being on there, it took me a little bit in following you that a student also receives a benefit, even though a student is paying tuition. But when you look at how much the state covers their tuition, then they also serve a benefit. So I can see the parallels there a little bit. I can see the conflicts a little bit, potentially, you know, if they had to follow ERISA laws. But I also see that this brings parity with a student because a student also receives benefit due to the fact that we spend so much money per student in subsidizing their education. I also want to say one other thing is I hope we can sustain the university so that we can have employees on the board if this bill were to pass. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Representative Drummond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Did you consider perhaps adding a second student member? Because the process already exists. There are way more students than faculty or other employees. And that would eliminate the need to make the president the tiebreaker. Then you would have 11, or whatever that number is. You'd have an odd number, 2 of which are students.
Yeah, through the chair, Representative Drummond, I did not, so you're asking, in addition to the faculty, yet another student, so there'd be an odd number. No, I never thought of adding another student. The one thing I did think of a while back was a staff member. So there'd be a faculty, a student, and staff, and I think there's, Kentucky, right in front of us, has that, to make it an odd number. But I didn't think of adding another student. The other option would be to wait for someone whose term to expire and then replace them with a faculty member, so it would stay at 11. But I didn't want to reduce the number, so I just thought adding an even number. I mean, hopefully the votes aren't 6-6. I mean, you'd hope that most of the issues would be have more support than 6-6, but.
Follow up, Madam Chair.
Follow up.
Thank you. The Anchorage Municipal Assembly is asking at our election that's underway here shortly to add an additional assembly member to make all 6 assembly districts two-member districts, which will make a 12-member body. The mayor does not have a vote on the Anchorage Assembly, although some city councils and assemblies in the state do have the mayor as a voting member. But to me, the voting balance is very important. I mean, we face it every time we take a vote on any issue here in this body. And I would be interested in a little more exploration of the rules that they operate under and what that might be like if the president has a vote, and also if any of these other bodies that you have researched have the president of the university as a voting member.
Through the chair to Representative Drummond, the other idea that was mentioned was that, and I'm not an expert on procedure, but Robert's rules, I'll further research it, but that the chair is not a voting member, but only votes on a tie, breaking a tie for the chair. So typically the chair wouldn't, but I don't believe that's how the Board of Regents has been operating. I'm not saying they're breaking the rules, but
Representative Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have just a lot of things that I have questions about, if I might, Madam Chair.
Follow up, yes.
Thank you. So, first of all, I just did a little bit of math on the other boards, and Oregon, if you look at just the makeup of the other boards by number, Oregon 7%, is the weight of a faculty vote. Pennsylvania is 3%, Florida is 6%, Tennessee is 6%, and Kentucky is 9%. This would weight, the faculty vote would be an 8%. 8% of weighted vote, the only one that's higher would be Kentucky. If there's not an expansion of the board, it is, just a note of comparison. And I appreciate you bringing this forward. I recognize there's the value in talking about this, but so I had my other, but anyway, that was just something I wanted to make note of. But also, and I think this kind of got touched on, and this would be where I would want you to explain how the faculty role will change, because now I think they have a seat, but they're a non-voting member, and they aren't able to attend executive session, but they can be part of the conversation on a vote. Is that correct?
through the chair, Representative Johnson, that's correct. It would be like if I was a faculty member and you guys were the Board of Regents, we could sit and dialogue, and I might get called on. But it's sort of like Puerto Rico or Guam in the U.S. Congress. They can watch, but they can't vote.
Okay. So the conflict I would see, and like I say, I think it got touched on, is whether this would create a conflict between a faculty that's hiring their supervisor as well as and evaluating their supervisor. I mean, being part of that vote. That's one thing I'd like you to address. And then in addition to it, if you could see that as having that access to executive session where you may be talking about personnel matters that are very sensitive, or other types of negotiations, including hiring negotiations or contract negotiations. Would you just speak to those two things?
Yeah, through the chair, Representative Johnson. I guess as far as access to sort of sensitive information, the same goes for the student as well, and we would expect them to act in a professional manner and recuse themselves if it was a direct conflict of interest. If there's executive session is for, when there is sensitive information, and I would trust that they can guard that information. And like I say, it's the same with the student. As far as the faculty member sort of holding any power over the president in a firing situation, I don't know the exact mechanism of when they hire a new president. I don't know that they've fired a president. I know the faculty senate, for example, will take a vote on their support or non-support of a president. That's happened in Anchorage, I believe, more than once. So I don't think the faculty is shy about expressing their opinion. This, as you said, would be 1/7 or 1/8? 1/8. 8%, 8%. So about 1/12. Well, yeah, exactly 1/12. So, so they would have 1/12 of the voting power. So if I believe when they hire, they select a president and the board votes on it. So they would have one vote. And I would hope that wouldn't be a 6-6 tie on whether to hire or fire a president. I would think they would want to have a little more support on either way that they go on that. But I guess I just keep going back to the student. I mean, the student has power over the president of the university, which seems out of balance a little bit, but I think that's just their role, and they so far have done it well. No one's talking about removing the student regent. No one's saying that's not working too well.
And through the chair to Representative Johnson and the committee as a whole, I just wanted to clarify one thing too, which is a lot of folks might look at a student regent on the board and say, well, it's just sort of a limited kind of power that they have or influence. And in all of the conversations that I've had with the board and the president and the student regents over the years, the student regent position is taken very, very seriously. They are held to a very high standard of professional conduct. I've had several close acquaintances be the student regent and talked with them about the role and what their expectations are. And they do have to make decisions about programs being cut. They do have to make decisions about tuition increase and have those statements pretty publicly out there, even when the student body as a whole may not support those decisions. So another thing I just wanted to note is the student regent is held to a standard to protect the interests of the University of Alaska as a whole, not necessarily the campus that they're currently attending, not necessarily just what the student interest is. And that's very clear to the student regents over time. And I think it's reasonable to expect the faculty regent to maintain that same standard of professionalism, nonpartisanship, and ability to make decisions in the best interest of the university.
If I may add to that, to the committee or Representative Johnson, the vote that the Board of Regents had recently to, terminate the Department of Education at the University of Anchorage campus. I don't know what the correct term is, but they moved the department. Accreditation is no longer accredited, but the Fairbanks campus is. So I think they moved the sort of administrative center, and that was a 6-5 vote, and a student voted in the affirmative to move that program. So I'm not sure if the student was in that program, and I'd have to do a little more research. But that was a close vote. A student took a vote to take that action. So to say the student does, it's not a token position. It's a very serious position. In this case, they were on the side of a one-vote majority.
Yes, Representative Prox.
Madam Chair. Through the chair, if you could just refresh my memory on, is the student regent elected by the students or forwarded to the governor for appointment like the other regents?
So through the chair to Representative Prox, the way the student regent process works is students at each of the 3 main campuses, if they would like to be considered, and I believe there have been some years where a student has not gone through the process. If they'd like to be nominated for the position, they go through a petition process, and they have to get a certain percentage of their peers at that institution, including any rural campuses that might be in that institution's purview, to sign the petition. And then the governor receives a list of names to choose from. Generally speaking, as a side note, the governor will, in some measure, rotate where that student regent is coming from, what part of the state, what university they're affiliated with. There have been situations where a UAF or a UAA student has been appointed for multiple terms. However, typically speaking, they try to vary up the affiliation of the student regent and choose the person that's most qualified for the position.
If I may follow up?
Follow up?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, I guess all of the other universities that have faculty members, let me back up to put this in context. What I'm concerned about is having it's the faculty union, correct? So it's legally.
Through the chair to Representative Prox, the election process for the faculty regent would be through the faculty senate of each university.
Through the faculty senate. Okay.
And so the faculty senate would, each faculty senate, UAA, UAF, and UAS, would select from their membership. So it would have to be someone who is on the faculty senate for their institution.
I think they can just choose any faculty member.
The faculty senate chooses a faculty member. I apologize. Faculty senate from each institution chooses 2 faculty members. And so the governor would receive a list of 6 names for consideration. 2 forwarded from the faculty senate of UAF, 2 from UAA's faculty senate, 2 from UAS. So the faculty union doesn't have a role in this process.
Follow-up?
I guess I have to just digest that one for a while.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Representative Tuck.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, looks like section 2 is adding a new section that is selecting that board member. And then the governor is going to be selecting from that list of nominees, but then section 4 is how the faculty senate of each campus will nominate. So it looks like section 4 happens first, and then section 2, the governor will appoint from those. But when I look at section 4, I don't see where, I see it in the sectional analysis, but I don't see where it actually says from the Senate, faculty senate. And if you can explain how the faculty senate works.
It says
Through the chair to Representative Tuck,
Line 12?
line 12, page 2.
Representative Drummond.
It says, on line 12 on page 2 of the bill, it says 3 faculty senates.
And if you can, if I may, Madam Chair, through the chair, explain how the faculty senates, how they're made up, and what their functions are.
So through the chair to Representative Tuck, the faculty senate at each university is, they hold elections, I believe, yearly for members whose term lengths are expiring. And a faculty senator can get appointed. I'm not sure if there are any term limits on faculty senate members. I believe they can be appointed as many times as they'd like to be elected. They go through an election process, is my understanding, and they serve, I believe, a 2 or 4 year term length. I can look into this more for you.
And if you don't mind, when you do look into this through the chair, what their functions are currently also. Okay, thank you.
Ms. Carrick, we do have Luann Picardi, Associate Professor of UAA online. Do you think is she there for to answer questions?
Through the chair to Rep. Story, I think we have some folks online for public testimony, but if you believe somebody might be good to answer questions about faculty senate.
Yeah, we didn't have our invited testimony today.
Okay.
But we have faculty senate members that would be happy to speak to the inner workings of the Senate faculty.
Okay.
Faculty Senate.
Okay, we will wait for that then, and they're there for public testimony. Thank you for clarifying that. I had a couple questions. I see that on the one of the letters that we have in the packet, that the reason why you want to change the amendment from 4 years to 2 years is because the faculty believes that it would take a lot of time, so it would interfere with their teaching and research assignments, and so they would like to have a 2-year commitment rather than a 4-year commitment. So then we go down a little bit farther, and it suggests that faculty regents be chosen in rotation from UAF, UAA, and UAS and extended campuses. Is that something that you want to put into the bill, or is that a different function?
Co-Chair Story, no, I do not want to put that in the bill. Regionalism, I think, is not really what the Board of Regents is about. It's about the university. There was a bill some years ago in this body for making the whole board have regional, so many from Anchorage, Fairbanks, the Valley, et cetera. And that was rejected ultimately. And I'm glad it was, because I think it politicizes the function of the board too much. And I want the board to be really about the whole university and not about a particular campus. Even the student region isn't rotated through. They might pick 2 UAAs in a row, or they just pick the best person they think is there for the job. So I don't really want to introduce regionalism. If it happens to be 3 in a row from UAS, so be it.
Okay, thank you for that explanation. Along the lines, Ms. Carrick, you had said that the student role you see as they have been very professional, nonpartisan, thinking of the campus as a whole. So, of course, we'd expect that from any faculty member. Have you or Representative Wohl talked to any of the Board of Regents and how they would view the addition of a faculty member, if they see it that way, or what are their pros and cons of the position?
To
Addition.
Co-Chair Story, I have spoken to Board of Regent members and faculty members in general. Some years ago, there was pushback and hesitation, but I think more recently I've heard from some members who, for obvious reasons, stay anonymous in these conversations. But I think there's recently, and especially this sort of kerfuffle that came up over the summer with the faculty feeling underrepresented by the board, and I think they're open to it. The members, I haven't talked to all 11 of them, but I've talked to a handful, and they're not opposed. They're not going to call in and say that they support it either, but they're not opposed. So, and I think it's a transition, and I think I'm sure there's some that are opposed, and maybe in a way that speaks to that this isn't such a bad idea, And I think it's good to have, I'm just one of those people that thinks if there's a problem between 2 parties, for example, the best thing to do is to get them together and hear their respective point of views, which they do. I mean, the faculty do have a voice. I've been to Board of Regents meetings where faculty members speak up, and certainly students speak up quite a bit during public testimony. And I think faculty members maybe who are just random faculty members would be hesitant to come before the board and make a strong statement for the obvious reason, because they're an employee. But I think if they're on the Board of Regents, that would be their role, and that would be their job, and that would be expected of them. So I think it would give them sort of the ability to speak out and fulfill that function.
Also, to the chair, Representative Story, I just wanted to also note that we did reach out to the Northwest College and Commission on Academics, the accrediting board, which, as members may recall, wrote a pretty nerve-wracking letter to the university over last summer's fiscal situation. And they also are taking a politically neutral stance, but it's also encouraging that they're not opposed to this idea either, and they do see that there's merit in having that seat at the table, voting power, and that does offer a better stakeholder input for faculty, which was one of their main concerns in the budgeting process last year for the university, was that faculty and staff weren't getting enough of a voice in the board.
Okay. I saw Representative Tuck had a question, Representative Prox, and then I would like to go to public testimony. There are some people online. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So on page 1, under section 2, we're looking at a faculty member who is employed at or has acquired tenure at the University of Alaska Anchorage. So when they acquired tenure, that doesn't mean that they, it says tenured, and it's acquired tenure. Then we go down to line 11. A person appointed as a regent under this subsection forfeits the office if the person is no longer a full-time tenured faculty member. Gotcha. No, I just explained it to myself. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
So so if I may, what if, so in this case right here, I mean, that's one of the problems I have with the undue influence of the president over the faculty member, both having a voice and a vote on this board. I know the president is limited to a tiebreaker, but as you pointed out earlier, there was a 6-5 vote recently. I can see how the president can have a lot of influence, and so the president has the influence of removing a person from the board just simply by terminating them. I mean, if I look at this, forfeits the office if the person is no longer a full-time tenured faculty member. So I just want to point that out there. I just have a little bit of concern with the president's role as a tiebreaker.
Through the chair, Representative Tuck, a tenured professor is, you can't just fire them. So and that's one of the reasons we'd want a tenured professor, because their job's a little more secure than, say, an assistant or a non-tenured professor. So.
Thank you for that. Appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Prox.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Whoops.
Happens to me all the time.
I will have to come back to that one. Yeah, I'd like to hear public testimony.
Great. Thank you for those good questions and responses. Oh, Representative Johnson.
I just had one little filler question. Thank you, Madam Chair. So how do you think it would affect it if you had a recently retired faculty member?
Through the chair, Representative Johnson, are you suggesting that that would be the definition of this other board member would be a retired faculty member? I think that's been suggested in the past. I think that would help. I mean, I think there might even be one on there now. I think John Davies is I don't know if he's a professor per se, but I probably was. So I believe his perspective is helpful, but I think he's the only one, and I think that's just by happenstance. So.
Thank you. We will now open public testimony on House Bill 180, and I'm going to start with Maria Williams from the University of Alaska Faculty Alliance. Please state your name and affiliation for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Maria Williams. I'm a faculty member at the University of Alaska Anchorage, and I'm currently chair of Faculty Alliance. And I want to thank Representative Wohl for the bill. And I'm just wanted to provide the support for this bill and provide perhaps some insight. So Faculty Alliance is the system-wide governance group. It consists of the Faculty Senate leadership of University of Alaska Anchorage, University of Alaska Fairbanks, and University of Alaska Southeast. And all of our faculty senates are the terms for our presidents, our first vice presidents, and past presidents is 1 year. And the chair of Faculty Alliance rotates. So, for example, this is my 1 year here. Next year it will go to the past president of UAS, and then the following year UAF. So Faculty Alliance supports this. We met last Friday and we endorsed this bill. Our only concern was the 4-year term that we felt might be too onerous for a faculty member given our research and our teaching responsibilities. So we had suggested a 2 or even 3-year term would be more amenable to the faculty region if this bill is approved. One of the other things I want to point out, too, is that oftentimes the Board of Regents and the president are making decisions at a very high level, 50,000-foot level. And the faculty and the student region, of course, we have kind of we're there. We're in the trenches. We're front and center. So it's been frustrating at times. For example, the Faculty Alliance, we've passed 8 resolutions this past year, and of course it's been a tremendously challenging year. But some of the decisions we feel and the discussions being made are being made without having very important information that would help the university move forward in a more positive direction. Simply because the decision making right now is made at a very, very high level. Another point I'd like to make is that faculty in general spend their entire careers at their institutions rather than looking at the administration. For example, I've been at UAA since 2011. I've had 3 deans, 5 provosts, and 3 chancellors. I think there's been 2, maybe 3 university presidents. So the faculty are the individuals that are really stabilizers to the university, the guardians of the curriculum. We're the ones that we protect the curriculum. Of course, that's very integral for accreditation. So just providing some insights there, and I'm happy to answer any questions, if any, and I want to thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for Ms. Williams? Representative Prox.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Through the chair, Ms. Williams, the Faculty Alliance, you said, deals with system-wide governance, and I'm assuming that means that it's a group that gets together and considers those sort of things and then sends recommendations to, well, I guess that would be the question, to whom? And is that correct? Do I have a correct understanding of what you're doing?
Yeah, so a Faculty Alliance, we meet every 2 weeks for 2-hour meetings, and it consists of the leadership of our faculty senate. So we have the pulse of the faculty. We are there's 3 governance groups. So there's the Coalition of Student Leaders, which consists of elected leadership from the 3 student governance groups. There's also Staff Alliance, and again, these are all elected positions, and Faculty Alliance. And so you'll see the current leaders, oftentimes we get to do a brief 10-minute presentation to each Board of Regents meeting. It's been frustrating. Sometimes I've had questions, or I had comments, or I wanted to provide more insight, and the chair doesn't always call on us. We're seated, we can attend the meetings. They don't always call on us, even though we might provide a statement. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, I get a feel for how that works. Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Representative Drummond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Williams, for your testimony. I found it very interesting when you said that in your position since 2011, you have served under several changes of administration. Can you repeat those numbers for me, please? So I started at UAA in 2011 in the College of Arts and Sciences, and there have been 3 deans. The current one is an interim dean, 5 provosts, and the past, I believe, 3 provosts. Yes, the past 3 provosts are interim, and I believe it's been 2 university presidents. It's definitely been 2 university presidents since 2011, and some of this is normal to have top-level administrative changes. It is unusual to have this many interim appointments, and okay, thank you for that. I think that reflects the general state of disorder of the university in these contentious times. Thank you, Ms. Williams.
Through the chair, if I may add, Representative Drummond, and I think the testifier made the point that a lot of times a president, they don't last 10 or 20 years. That's just not the typical. And I know people that have become deans, they're professors and then become deans. Well, the dean job is very different than the professor job, and some of them don't mind going back to teaching.
Thank you for your testimony, Ms. Williams. I'm now going to go to Max Kullberg online. Please state your name and affiliation for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Max Kullberg, and I'm an assistant professor with the WAMI School of Education at UAA. Thank you for the opportunity to testify and support a House Bill 180 from Representative Wolf that would create a faculty region on the University of Alaska Board of Regents. Thank you, Representative Wolf and Chief of Staff Ashley Carrick, for the wonderful and thorough presentation. I hope to make just one clarification touched on by Maria Williams just now. Currently in board meetings, the Faculty Alliance chair that sits at a different table is allowed to give a short presentation, but must be called on in order to speak, and usually not invited to actively participate in the conversation. There's not a true flow of information from faculty of the Board of Regents. Faculty do not currently have a voice. Recently, the NWCCU indicated that the accreditations of the University of Alaska system were at risk, and to come into compliance, we had to improve in two aspects. The first was to delineate the roles of the chancellor and the president of the university. The second was to improve shared governance. HB 180 would be an enormous step in the right direction for improving shared governance at the university. The bill for introducing a faculty regent has incredible support and has generated great excitement at the university. United Academics, or UNAC, is the largest union at the University of Alaska system, representing over 1,100 full-time faculty at UAF, UAA, UAS, and extended campuses. The Representative Assembly of UNAC, which I'm a member of, has voted unanimously to endorse creating a faculty regent. The job of faculty is to be in the classroom and to be in touch with the needs of students. We have an in-depth knowledge of academic programs and research that must be shared in order to have a board of regents that fully understands the university. Adding a faculty regent will ensure that decisions are made with a more comprehensive understanding of their impact on students, staff, faculty, and the local community. One amendment that we'd like to respectfully suggest is that a majority vote by the regents is required to approve a motion as suggested by HB 195 introduced by Representative Josephson. This would ensure that the major decisions are made with a general consensus. In addition, we are not aware of any university system where a tie-breaking vote is allowed by someone who is not a voting regent. In response to Representative Drummond's comments, adding a staff regent would be another good option. Regardless, passage of HB 180 would represent a turning point in shared governance and has the full support of the faculty body. With this bill, faculty would finally have a voice at the table and a constructive avenue for sharing their combined knowledge to help create a great University of Alaska system. Thank you so much for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Kulberg? Yes, Representative Prox.
Yes, through the chair. I believe you said that the faculty doesn't have a voice. My understanding was that there is a faculty representative that does have full talking privileges, discussion privileges, just doesn't have a vote. But there is some voice on the board in addition to these committees, correct?
Through the chair, thank you so much for that question. If I could get one thing across in my testimony, it'd be to clarify some of those early statements. We really do not have a voice. So right now, Maria Williams, who is the Faculty Alliance chair, who you just heard from, she is at a different table, as are the chancellors. And at some point in that Board of Regents meeting, they're usually allowed, most of the time, to give a presentation. So at that point, Maria Williams can give, a 3 to 4 minute update on faculty opinions. But as the conversation that goes throughout the day at the Board of Regents table takes place, there is not speaking privileges for either the chancellors or for Faculty Alliance or Staff Alliance or Student Alliance that are all sitting at these separate tables. There's no true input, no way of letting our voice be heard. And it's really frustrating at times because they're talking about subjects which we have so much knowledge about, being in the classroom and being in touch with the students. And, unless a kind Board of Regent member decides to say, well, let's hear a faculty opinion, which in all the Regents meetings I've been to, I've heard maybe once or twice, we have no way of sharing our information. So if there were a way, if this bill went forth, it would be an enormous step in just being able to communicate, let our combined knowledge of, if you combine the knowledge of the faculty member thousands of years with the university, being able to share that with the Board of Regents in a constructive way and having a vote would be an enormous step. And so we really want to thank Representative Wool for putting this forth.
Representative Drummond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Kulberg, for your testimony. You stated that you were not aware of any board. If you could restate what you said about not aware of any Board of Regents where a non-member of the board has a tie-breaking vote. If you could clarify that again.
Oh, right. So that statement was that we, and it's not a strong statement because we need to go through each individually, but as a group, we have a group of us that gets together and discusses things like this. And as a group and the research that we've done, similar to the research Ashley Carrick has done, we've never come across a board where an ex officio or non-voting member was then suddenly introduced as having the tie-breaking vote, since the president is not officially a voting member of the Board of Regents. And so personally, I very much like either the three options that were mentioned in this meeting, which were either having a 7-5 majority, which would allow for a consensus of the board, or introducing a staff regent member is a great idea, since really you do have these three levels at the university: the faculty, staff, and the students. So it'd be enormous for the staff to have a voice as well. And I believe the idea was introduced by Representative Wool, which would be when a regent does retire, backing off the regents by one member.
Thank you, Mr. Follow-up?
Follow-up.
Thank you, Mr. Kullberg. I actually thought that an additional student regent would possibly work better. I think introducing a staff member would introduce another whole layer of complexity in terms of how that person would be selected. But since the process is already in place for the student member, it wouldn't be that big a deal. And as you can tell, I have a great deal of interest in how the voting would work and be fair. On the other hand, if there's an even number, then everybody needs to be adults and convince enough people to come to their position in order to pass a worthwhile idea. Okay, thank you, Mr. Kullberg. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, Ms. Carrick.
May I
If I
respond?
might just very briefly, through the chair, to Representative Prox, your comment. As Max Kohlberg just stated, there's obviously a very large gap between how the university sees the role of faculty on the board and how faculty see the role of faculty with the board. Because in my conversations with the university or with the board members, they have a seat at the table, they have speaking privileges, they have this voice, and they do have to be called upon by a board member in order to speak after the faculty report that occurs usually at the beginning of the meeting. And so we get two different stories. When you ask the university or you ask board members, they say, well, they have a voice, they can speak at any time as long as they're called on, and we would love to call on them. And then obviously we get a different side of it when you talk to faculty members. And that's been true across the board. So technically, they do have speaking privileges in that if you're a member of the public sitting in the back of the room, you can't stand up and ask to be recognized where the faculty could be. However, in practice, it's not happening to the same degree that faculty would like it to be. And I just wanted to point out that this testimony highlights the difference between what's on paper and what's in practice.
Representative Prox.
Yes, thank you. Through the chair. I certainly appreciate what they're saying. I've testified at assembly meetings, and it is exasperating when you put a lot of thought into something. They give you 3 minutes and a blank stare. That is definitely a challenge. But I thought I understood you to say that there was a faculty member sitting at the dais who could speak up at any time as a regular board member.
Through the chair to Representative Prox, I think there may have been a miscommunication. Just to clarify, they do have a table where they sit alongside I believe the chair of the Coalition of Student Leaders and the chair of the Staff Alliance, and they make that brief report at the beginning of the meeting.
Mm-hmm.
After that time, and usually Board of Regents meetings last all day, they would raise their hand and hope to be acknowledged. And ideally they would be acknowledged, but clearly that doesn't always happen in practice.
Okay, that helps me. That's a different.
And through the chair, Representative Prox, to get a visual, I don't know if you've been to one of their meetings, but the table is like a horseshoe with three, and then the fourth end that would be open has a long table at it. So, like I say, it's kind of like us facing you if your table went all the way around and touched the ends here, but we're technically not at the same table.
Okay.
But they're sitting with the chancellors and other people that are at this sort of end table.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Kohlberg. We have two more people who are online who want to testify, and so I'm going to go to the next one right now, and that is Stacy Lucasen. Please, state your name and affiliation for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Stacy Lucasen. I'm speaking as myself, but I did serve as a student regent 2 terms ago. I'm currently adjuncting and I'm on the Alumni Association Board for UAA. Thank you for the opportunity to support Representative Wool's House Bill 180, especially with considering the amendment to make it a 2-year term. 2 years is a long time to be a student and fully, have my life wrapped up in the university and then also take on the role of the Board of Regents. And so I really fully appreciate you guys are considering making that a 2-year term, assuming this is passed. This is really a necessary step to remediate the issues that put all 3 of the state universities' NWCCU accreditations at risk this past year. The Faculty Alliance Chair, as you guys have talked about, it's not a full position. They don't get to speak. And so not having that insight is really one of the 2 major components that put the NWCCU accreditations at risk. So it's been this era of budget reductions since 2014, and failing to include insight from faculty, especially in committee meetings and executive sessions when that insight would be really useful. They've been excluded from all of those times. And so the lack of shared governance and the lack of clarity around reporting lines are really what put our accreditations at risk. Updating Alaska's laws around the reporting lines to reflect this modern era of multiple universities would also alleviate the concern around hiring and bonuses for the president and the risk of the faculty being fired or bullied by the president, as some of you had mentioned. I also appreciate Representative Drummond's request for a 7-member majority instead of asking the president to vote. That provision is not only unnecessary, but as she mentioned, a somewhat inappropriate relationship given that the president is employed at the pleasure of the board and is their direct employee. Plus, relying on an odd number is old-fashioned. Better governance comes from seeking consensus, so a 6-6 tie or a 5-5 tie should fail. A tie like that means the issue is too contentious or too poorly understood at that time to make a major change. Looking back to our risk of our NWCCU accreditation, not having full understanding and not having full participation by all of the stakeholders really, really did put the university's accreditations at risk. As far as conflicts, there are members on the board that have large contracts, at-large members, and they're expected and do recuse themselves from those votes. So I think the faculty is going to be at least as professional as any of the at-large board members. We had spoken about this a little bit when I was on the board informally, but it didn't seem worth the effort to put it through the legislature at that time since we were focused on things like Title IX compliance, maintenance of infrastructure, and other major budget things. But there wasn't a lot of pushback against having the faculty voice. It was just not seen as important before the clarity around our lack of shared government really came out last summer.
Thank you for your testimony. I see Representative Drummond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much, Ms. Lucasen. As a former student regent, you have a unique perspective on this whole thing. I have a couple of questions for you. As a former school board member myself and 2 others at this table on the committee, as former school board members, we got a lot of training from the State School Boards Association when we became new board members. What kind of training and support, if any, does the student regent or any other regent get when they are newly appointed to the board?
It's pretty minimal. So I was supposed to join the board with 4 other members, at-large members. They were able to go and have sort of a group training session, but I got sent up by myself. So I think I actually got a little bit more information than most board members did. And I had come off of being the student body president, so I already sort of knew who all of the people were. But you're handed a binder. It's like a 5-inch ring binder. And you go through it with the board's executive assistant, Brandy. And so she goes over highlights. A lot of it is around confidentiality, your expectations to be present as a board member and show up when there's board meetings. They talk about the schedule and the calendar and the commencements and what you do for that. And then you write up your bio or adjust it and then take their photos so that you can go on the website and then get a tour of the Petrovich building, potentially a tour of the UAF campus, and maybe some other reading material to take home.
Pretty minimal, in other words, Madam Chair. Sorry.
Representative Drummond.
Okay, in other words, it's pretty minimal, and it's by the executive assistant, not by a professional trainer of any sort.
Sorry, through the chair. Yes, that is. I think I also met the general counsel on that day.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Ms. Lucasen. Appreciate your testimony.
Yes, thank you for your testimony. We'll now move on to Luann Picardi. Please state your name and affiliation for the record and proceed with your testimony.
Good morning. My name is Luann Picard, and I'm an associate professor and chair of the project management department in the College of Engineering at the University of Alaska Anchorage since 2007. And I'm also an elected member of the UAA Faculty Senate. I thank you for the opportunity to testify in support of House Bill 180 from Representative Wool to create a faculty regent on the University of Alaska Board of Regents. Prior to joining UAA in a faculty role, I spent 20 plus years in the private sector, including as vice president and general manager for Hewlett-Packard, leading a large global business unit. In addition to my faculty role, I also serve on the global board of directors for the Project Management Institute. I'm one of 12 directors elected to serve nearly 2 million members and professional credential holders in 190 countries worldwide. I also hold a professional certification conferred by the Institute of Directors. My service as an industry executive and officer for over 10 nonprofit boards gives me a clear understanding of how the composition of a board makes a material difference in mission achievement. A key attribute of any successful board is diversity of thought combined with relevant subject matter expertise. Most of the 135 boards and commissions serving Alaska through appointments made by the governor and confirmed by the legislature include subject matter experts. For example, each of the 7 members of our Alaska Board of Fisheries brings a unique perspective representing the wide spectrum of stakeholders combined with their relevant experience and knowledge of this important industry. It is difficult to envision that board being effective without that expertise. Similarly, the Alaska Aerospace Corporation Board includes a minimum of 2 members with direct experience in the aerospace industry. Currently, appointments to the University of Alaska Board of Regents do not require professional experience in higher education. Including a faculty regent would add relevant subject matter expertise similar to what is found in other Alaska boards and commissions. A faculty regent could provide valuable and current insights into higher education in Alaska through our direct and daily experience teaching students, conducting research, our knowledge of accreditation, and active participation in the shared governance process that is central to collective and inclusive decision-making within the university. Having a faculty seat at the table rather than ad hoc testimony would help guide strategic and policy decisions relevant to the university and represent a critical stakeholder group in the decision-making process. As Dr. Maria Williams mentioned earlier, many faculty serve long lengths of service during times of significant administrative change and can often represent consistent institutional knowledge. Passage of HB 180 has the full support of faculty to represent our collective views, actively contribute to respectful dialogue, and support the integrity of the university as a whole. With this bill, a voting faculty regent would contribute directly, objectively, effectively, and with accountability to the work of the board in service to the state of Alaska and the communities we serve. Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts today.
Thank you, Ms. Picard. Does anyone have any questions? Seeing none, we will see if there's any public testimony in the room. We have addressed all those online. Seeing no public testimony in the room, I would like to thank Representative Wool and Ms. Carrick for bringing this bill forward. I appreciated the good discussion today. From my notes, I have that you will give the committee some more information on the other states who have how they handle voting measures that seemed to be a big topic of interest. Representative Wall.
Yeah, Co-Chair Story, thank you. And I kind of request that we leave public testimony open at this point so that we can also get some invited testimony at our next meeting. We just weren't exactly sure of the time today. That they would be. We had some people, but they had a small window of time.
Yes, I will be sure and say that. So thank you very much. Seeing no one else testifying, we will leave public testimony open and return to this bill at a future meeting. Thank you again.
Thank you, committee.
Seeing no further comments or questions, our next House Education meeting will be Monday, March 9th at 8 a.m. At that meeting and throughout the week, we will consider legislation focused on early literacy and pre-K programs. Please note that on Saturday, March 14th at 1 p.m., we will hold a statewide teleconference public meeting on House Bill 153, pre-elementary programs. With that, at 9:32, we are adjourned.